listening to
What the Tech?
Welcome to the What the Tech podcast, where we talk about business and office technology and put our 20 years of expertise to discussing trends and issues impacting the workplace.
And welcome back to What the Tech. I'm Rolando.
And I'm Dave Kelly.
And you are listening to What the Tech, where we talk about technology and we speak to industry experts to gain their insights in today's evolving business world.
Very, very cool, Rolando. Really great to see you. Hey, listen, before we get into it, I think we should do a couple of shout outs before we introduce today's guests. Hey, listen,
Sure.
I have a shout out to a great new customer of ours. I want to thank Sue Russo. Sue's the owner of Spa Ben Marnikos in Appleton, Wisconsin. She actually found us on YouTube, Rolando. We were doing some some demos on video and some headsets. And they don't use headsets over there. And she needed something for her staff. She was missing a ton of phone calls. They were playing voicemail tag. There was some issue with the phones and the hotel that they're in, but she allowed us to work with them. We found her some solutions. We outfitted her team. So, Sue, thank you so much for putting your trust in myself and Global Tech and our team. And I know that the benefits of being hands-free and mobile are really going to be a game changer for you and your team. So thank you so much for your business.
All right, Sue, thank you. We appreciate that. And you know, Dave, last week's episode, we had Sharina Kushner, who is a firecracker in every way. And she dropped some major insights on how to squeeze out the most dollars when budgets get tightened up. As you know, right now things are getting tightened up. Companies tightening the belt, the economy is tightening a little bit. But she gave us some nuggets and tips on what IT departments as well as companies can do to make the most of this and still get their projects off the ground. So thank you, Sharina, for coming on the show, and check that episode out.
Excellent.
All right. And what else we got, Dave?
Hey, a word from our sponsor, right? Today's episode is brought to you by Global Tech Worldwide. Technology experts providing trusted, personalized office IT solutions for over 20 years. Chad, if you're trying to outfit your team, are you going to go to a bunch of rookies or you want to work with some real professionals? We know.
I probably want to work with some professionals if I had the choice.
If you have a choice, which everyone should have a choice, you want to work with the right people. Work with Global Tech Worldwide, again, over 20 years of experience, and they'll get you exactly where you need to be for your personalized office IT solutions.
Well, thank you, Dave. And, you know, today's show, we have a special guest. So let me tell you a little bit about Chad before I bring him on. Chad is an experienced journalist, broadcaster, and storyteller whose expertise spans from news writing to play-by-play sports and documentary production. I'm going to ask him about the sports. I'm ready for him today with my Gophers gear, so I'm going to ask him about a little bit of sports. He is a Boulder, Colorado native whose education includes a 2016 MBA, a marketing concentration from the University of Denver. He's also done play-by-play for state championship games in the Wyoming Class 4A boys basketball, as well as the Iowa Class 2 football. I got a lot to ask him about that and unpack Minnesota versus Iowa. And you know, he's a well-traveled person, Dave. He's gone to Medellin, Colombia, which is it's a hot spot right now for digital nomads. I want to see what he thinks about remote working and what's happening there as well. And he is also a maven when it comes to podcast production, and he's worked on a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And so, without further ado, I want to welcome Chad Franzen to the podcast.
Hey,
What's up,
thank you so
Chad?
much. Hey, thanks so much. It's great to
Yes.
be here with you guys.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming on, Chad. I know that we had planned on one thing, but as we were talking right before we started taping, you know, maybe we're going to flip the script here and we're going to talk to you and put you on the interviewee seat.
Very nice. This will be kind of a new experience for me. I'm really used to being on the other side.
We're pulling an audible. What did Peyton Manning always say when he was calling the audible on field? Omaha.
Omaha, yes, it's famous Omaha. I did never like that audible. You know, Dave. I hated it. I would imagine from an enunciation perspective, having played football myself, Omaha is easy on the jaw and easy to project. And I would imagine he maybe did some, I don't know, I'm just kind of theoretically guessing here. Omaha is easy to announce to a group of guys, a crowd of 70,000 people yelling and screaming. It's easier to get Omaha across than some other words.
We're gonna have to come up with our own audible call, Rolando. Chad, you've been in broadcasting for a pretty long time. Tell us about some of your earlier experiences with broadcasting. How did you get into that?
Yeah, even as a kid, I grew up wanting to be kind of a sports announcer. I was like the kid who would listen to Denver Nuggets basketball games on the radio and then tape them and then re-listen to them over and over and try and imitate the announcer. So I always wanted to do that, and then I grew up, went to college at Colorado State, got a journalism degree, but as a young adult, I was just kind of clueless as to what I really wanted to do or how I was going to get into it. So I finally figured out a way to break into broadcasting in 2009, and I knew I had to start out by going to a small town, so I went to a town called Shadron, Nebraska, where they have one stoplight, and I had to do news for a year, and then I worked my way into becoming the voice of the Cardinals, which is the high school team. And in those small towns, high school sports are a big deal. Like people follow the Cardinals in Shadron, Nebraska, like people in Denver follow the Broncos. So you're just kind of immersed in covering the teams.
Chad, I just want to step in. I want to give a little flavor of that. You're talking about it. I know some people are going to be watching this and some are going to be hearing this. I want to share a little bit of that with our audience.
No yards so far for Caleb Early. He has not been the regular starter. You heard Coach Pat Fackrell talk in the pregame show about a lot of their senior players have been out of action or have left the team, and now the Evanston Red Devils operating with some backups as Piper takes the snap, now rolls out to the left side, tries to dump off a short pass to Kishba out of the backfield, and that is short and incomplete.
All right. Gives folks who have not heard your play-by-play voice a chance to hear some of that.
Yeah. Wow. Very nice. I haven't heard that in a while. Thank you. Yeah. When you're working in those small towns, you work every morning. You have to get there around 4:30, but you have to do the sports updates, and you have to go on to each. So most of those stations would have like somewhere between 2 and 5 shows going on, like a country show, a pop music show, whatever. And you go in there and you kind of yuck it up with the DJs, and then you give a sports update, and you have to do that. So you have to prepare the sports update. So your day kind of starts at 4:30, and then at 7 the high school football game starts. So you have to program your brain not to be completely filled with cobwebs to do those games. But the play-by-play was the highlight of those experiences for me, for sure.
Well, I've in the back of my mind, I've always wanted to do a little bit. I thought that maybe I'd go into broadcasting, but it's really a tough journey for a lot of people. Like you said, you've got to go to maybe to a small market to break in. It's competitive. Not everybody's going to rise to the level of some of the big name broadcasters. Sometimes these guys are former athletes, especially if you're talking sports. If that really was, kind of like I want to be in sports broadcasting, they bring in a lot of the retired NFL or basketball guys, coaches and whatnot. And as a broadcaster, that leaves really in the crew, you have one guy that's the commentator and then one guy that's the broadcaster, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of competition for those spots. And I can't imagine that climb, right? I mean, where was the point where you thought, maybe I may branch out into some other things?
I had lived in Shadron, Nebraska, as I said. That's where I got my start, and then I kind of bounced around a little bit. That's pretty common in radio, especially at that stage. I lived in Salida, Colorado, in a place called Spirit Lake, Iowa, where I ended up broadcasting a state championship football game, and then in Gillette, Wyoming. And then after that, you do a lot of driving. Especially in Wyoming, you drive like 7 hours, and often through blizzards. Oof. And there was one day I had to drive from Laramie to Cheyenne, which is not a far drive. It was on a Saturday morning, so I could broadcast a girls' high school basketball game on Saturday afternoon. And the snow was blowing sideways. I'm driving through. There's overturned semis on the road, and you don't get paid a whole lot in those jobs. and I was just thinking, what am I doing here?
Yeah, what are you doing in Wyoming? I know that a lot of people, that if they've heard of Wyoming, it's through Jackson Hole because they have the, famous event every year. A bunch of billionaires and millionaires go out there and have their annual thing, and so people moving out there because they want some land. But this is exactly what it's like. I lived in Minnesota for 7 years, and snow blizzards, some snow even up to people's roofs when you get out of the Twin Cities and into the more rural parts where there isn't snow plowing. It's not glamorous. So I guess if you're planning on living in Jackson Hole or somewhere else in Wyoming, be prepared, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wyoming compared to Iowa in the winter, Iowa. When I moved to Iowa, they always warned me about the winter. I'd rather live in Iowa during the winter than Wyoming any day.
It's got to be very remote because look, at least in Iowa, you got plows and streets that are going to get done. There's some population in Iowa as well as Minnesota, even to some extent the Dakotas, but Wyoming is even further west. So it's Cheyenne and probably everything else.
Oh yeah, it's the Wild West when it comes to road maintenance, things like that. It may be cleared, it may not be. Iowa and Minnesota are pretty disciplined, from what I could tell.
Oh my God! Look, here, so I live just outside the nation's capital, on the Virginia side. We get 2 inches. It's as if we got 20, but they're still coming around. In Minnesota, everything's so disciplined. It snows on Monday. This is the side of the street you're on. Snows on Tuesday. You go over here. The plows come here at 8 a.m. and it's just a rhythm of things that continue to go. And here, it's an absolute cluster, boop, right? And we don't know what to do. People are parked over here. Plows can't get through. It's just a mess. But you're right. In Minnesota, Iowa, those states like that, the Midwest, they know exactly what they're doing. So props to Minnesota Department of Transportation.
Definitely.
So awesome. I love hearing about those kinds of things, living out in the middle of nowhere or going out, because a lot of people don't know what that's like. For those people that haven't traveled to the Midwest, or really, would that Wyoming be the Rocky West? Is the Rockies?
Yeah, it's probably like the Rocky Mountains. It's right here with Colorado. We don't consider ourselves the Midwest. Probably more like the Rocky Mountain region.
Rocky Mountain West.
Yeah.
And the other thing, speaking of Rocky, but that's not as rugged. I saw in your profile that you had been to Medellin. And Medellin is in Colombia, and it's a place that is blowing up in terms of digital nomads. And what I wanted to ask you, because now things are really different than 15, 20 years ago when it comes to, you're going to have somebody announcing a game, broadcasting, even commenting from around the world, or doing a play-by-play from around the world. What do you think of this trend of working from anywhere? And where do you see that going as it relates to podcasting and broadcasting?
The ability to work from anywhere is fantastic. I think it presents some difficulties when it comes to podcasting and broadcasting, but in terms of a lifestyle and even attracting more people to a job that's already kind of popular, I think it's fantastic. The idea that you don't have to move to wherever I lived. Chadron, Nebraska, to get started. Maybe you can broadcast for Chadron, Nebraska, but not have to move there. Especially for as a young single guy at the time, my age, that was pretty depressing for about 2 years there in my life. Other than the fact that I was I was doing what I wanted to do. Yeah, exactly. Everything is closed on Sundays, so that was kind of unusual for me. And you hang out, and then if you want to go out, maybe you can go hang out at the bar with, a bunch of guys wearing overalls, and you can talk with them. Nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't my thing. Wasn't what I was used to at the time.
Well, now we have internet, we have social media, so you could be in those places, even though from a, population-wise, there aren't a lot of other folks to mingle with. The world was different back then, right? You had 4 or 5 channels. I still remember turning the dial on my TV, for those folks that still had TVs, turning the dial, and that's all you got. And then at 11 or 12 midnight, all the channels went off air.
Yeah, exactly.
So a different world.
That was a good world. And I think it's nice, I'm sure we've all unplugged You know, you take Sunday, you're like, you know what? I'm not going to look at my phone today. I'm going to unplug this. Nothing feels better than not having to respond to messages, check emails. I think it should be a weekly thing that people build into their schedule. I don't know if it's 1 hour, or 4 hours, or the entire day, but just to be able to shut down from all the social media stuff, I think that would be a blessing, and I think everyone should take time out of their lives to reconnect with their family and disconnect from the net for a little bit.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
No doubt. I tried to do that a little bit in the morning. Right. All right. I want to ask you something else, Chad. I know that for us, our journey to podcasting has taken some really interesting twists and turns. And, you know, the more I talk to people that want to be in podcasting or interested or somewhere along the journey of podcasting, there's always a moment where they're thinking about, is this right for me? Should I, what should I do here? And how can I get the most out of it? So if I were to ask you, you know, if somebody's in podcast or starting off or looking to get, what's the approach here? What's for somebody that's looking to do that and get the most out of a podcast?
I'll tell you what, podcasting is right for everybody. It can be a little nerve-wracking, you know, if you're not like me who wanted to grow up practicing announcing. It can be a little nerve-wracking, maybe introducing a podcast and things like that. But you have to think of it less in terms of creating a broadcast and more in terms of creating relationships.
Here comes a pro tip.
Just look at it like you're developing relationships rather than creating a broadcast, because a podcast gives you the opportunity to talk to people who maybe wouldn't want to talk to you otherwise because they might look at you like you're trying to sell something to them or something like that. Whereas in a podcast, you just get the chance to feature them. You can kind of develop a relationship. You know, I talk to people on podcasts every day, and it's like, you know, you start out, you're kind of getting to know each other, and then by the end, you're like friends. So you're starting a relationship with somebody. Everybody you've had on your podcast, if you have a podcast, is kind of like a friend. And then, you know, they might refer somebody else to you as a podcast guest, or they might refer somebody else to you as a customer, or they might become a customer or a client. You just never know what might happen. And you treat them, you know, when you're the host and you have somebody in your podcast, you generally treat them pretty well. You guys gave me a great intro. I'm sure you give all your guests great intros. You kind of build them up. You make them feel special. And you highlight them and what they're doing, compliment them, and then you can always come back to them later on. Hey, I need this. Hey, I noticed that you guys are doing this. I can help you in this respect. And they probably remember having a good time on your podcast, and that's how it starts. A lot of people think that they need to, you know, check SEO or check the number of clicks that they get for to see how many people listen to their podcast, and that can be valuable, but from our perspective at Rise 25, where I work, the most valuable thing is the relationships that you can build only through podcasts, in our opinion.
Right. I was going to say that, you know, it's encouraging to hear what you just said, Chad, because doing a podcast it's work. If you want to get it right, it's work, and you have to put in the hours really to develop your crafts. And it would be like something like, you know, you want to be you want to carve pieces of wood. You're not going to be a Leonardo da Vinci on day one. You know, you got to, you know, probably carve out several pieces of wood before you really get to that masterpiece level. Is that a healthy approach when it comes to podcasts? Because you talked about, you know, not getting the views or clicks. You know, and if you look at a podcast and, you know, I want to blow up and I only see, you know, 10 clicks or 10 views. You know, it's kind of discouraging when you see that. So how do you get past that, even though you know you're building relationships? You've talked to a lot of businesses. How do you psychologically deal with that?
In terms of not having enough clicks? Well, you can use that as a time to refine what you're doing. Maybe get your reads better, things like that, and kind of build forward, and then brainstorm at the time how you can encourage people to listen to what you're talking about. So you could follow other podcasts or listen to other podcasts or follow people on social media and kind of just comment, say, hey, great job. Here's a podcast that you might find interesting. And you could do it that way. But yeah, I could see how
commenting. Did you say commenting on other people's podcasts?
Yeah, exactly, and then promote yours.
So I don't know. Just throwing a name because everybody knows Joe Rogan, And I don't know, you love or hate him, but I go on his podcast and I put, oh wow, I love that episode when you interviewed Elon Musk. That something like that.
Yeah, you could do that. You can definitely do that. And then you can say, I have my own podcast as well. Something like that.
Ooh.
Now, when you do that, you have to be kind of prepared for people who are going to maybe rip on you for trying to promote yourself on somebody else's thing. But everybody does it, and as long as you're willing to kind of take a few anonymous social media shots, that's a good way to promote it.
Are you taking notes, Dave? Because I know you're the podcast king over there. You consume lots of podcasts.
Yeah, there's a few that I just there's something about these comedians with their podcasts, and they're not up there telling jokes. They're just having conversations, and I would much rather listen to someone's podcast on a weekly basis. I would rather listen to that podcast than spend the $150 for a ticket to go to one of their shows. It seems just way more rewarding. I feel like I'm actually like in like this inner circle type of thing when I'm listening to someone like Bill Burr, for example, who huge fan of. With us, Chad, we're technology experts. IT devices. We're 20 plus years. We know this stuff in our sleep. We've been doing podcasting for about 2 years, so we're still getting our bearings there. And my question would be, when do we balance? What's a good way to balance what we have 20 years of experience with? So doing product demos, tests, how-tos. This is what it sounds like. This is how comfortable it is. What kind of advice do you give to people that are balancing their expertise with these interviews and relationships that you're trying to build at the same time, bringing them together? Do you keep them separate? Do you bring them together? What's your advice for that?
I think you want to bring them together. What kinds of guests are you guys trying to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, business owners, folks that are in HR, IT, really across all the industries. Our main goal is to help people be more efficient in their communications.
So I'm guessing you ask them kind of about elements of their business that can relate to your business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you can bring them together by, asking good questions, and then when they give you an answer, maybe giving them some advice or some feedback, or, just kind of listening to them and saying, yeah, we have a lot of clients that deal with something like that. And we often suggest this, something like that. And then you can say, but, it sounds like you're doing great. And in that respect, and then move on to your next question. But you're kind of bringing them together. You know what I mean? So you have questions that will demonstrate your expertise while still highlighting the guest who probably doesn't have the same expertise as you. And you can allow them to demonstrate their expertise as well.
Well said. Good advice.
Wow. Well, I'm definitely taking notes as well as mental notes, because all of this is like juicy nuggets to me, and I know that's going to help us sharpen our sword. I mean, it really seems like you're playing an investigator with what you've said. You're building a relationship. You are trying to make your conversation relevant so that it's in their minds by tying their business interests, and as well as what we're trying to promote. I mean, there's a lot to unpack to get a podcast right. So I've heard other folks, and let me see if you agree with this. I know that when I consume YouTubes and watch content creators, they say, think of the first 100 videos you upload as just trash. And you're going to learn from all of those videos, every single one. That's the second one to the 50th to the 99th one. By the time you get to 100, you're going to look back like, wow, I can't believe that first video sucked. Although I thought it was great, it sucked. And now you're at 101, and you're at a place where you can maybe start pivoting and making changes or looking at different avenues for the podcast. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. So I think you just have to look at it as you're kind of refining what you do. You're still building relationships, even if you're producing stuff that you're not particularly proud of as it comes to like an actual publication, especially when you start out. Don't worry about it. You're building relationships with people who could potentially become clients or referral partners, and you're getting better at what you do. As somebody who started out in broadcasting and now works in podcasting and kind of works with clients, a lot of the clients will have, especially the new ones, they'll be worried, like I had to read my sponsorship message 5 times or I screwed up the introduction 3 times. At least you can redo it and nobody heard. And when I started in radio,
right.
I still have recordings of some of my first radio broadcasts. Oh my God! I can't believe they didn't fire me like right on the spot. I was so bad.
It's so hard.
Bad.
It's so hard to look at some of that stuff. I pulled out a reel that I had made in 2000 that had it had commercials that we had made with a group. I went to a technical school for video and radio production, and so I found this reel recently. It was VHS, and I had to dig out this VHS player so I could play it, and I was watching it, and I immediately turned it off. And my son is like, "Dad, I gotta see that." I'm like, "I don't want to be around. I can't watch this. I'm not building on this." And I kind of feel that when we look at some of our earlier production stuff, I'm like, I don't know why I'm wearing that. My lighting was bad. I'm stuttering. It was all those things. You look back at it, and you're like, I need to watch this because I need to learn from it as much as it hurts.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of that, and very critical, but that's how we learn and get better.
I would make mistakes. I'd get names wrong. You'd see like the phone lines ringing while I was doing my broadcast, complaining about how I got names wrong.
Oh my God.
So yeah, if you're just getting into it, or you feel like you're struggling a little bit, just keep going. It'll pay off sooner than you think.
Well, let me ask you about that, about payoff, because some folks, when they're getting into podcasts, they see the headlines, like Joe Rogan and $bazillion that he's making and the contract he signed. Alexandra Cooper as well, who's got signed, and wow. You see dollar signs and you think, well, I'm going to jump into this pond and see if I can make myself into another Joe Rogan or Alexandra Cooper. Is the road paved to riches at the end of the podcast journey, or is that just a few at the very top that are commanding that type of that type of salary or recognition, and everybody else is somewhere in the middle or way down below? What's that like?
If you want a payoff strictly as a result of being a podcaster, I'd say, depending on your niche and your expertise, if you can get your message to the right audience, you may not become Joe Rogan, but you could become very popular in your circles. I produce podcasts for a company that produces that distributes sewing and quilting activities. I don't know anything about that. They'll have me reach out to a guest. I'll have never heard of the guest, but apparently this is like the guest is really a big celebrity in this niche. So they're like, "Oh, I can't believe we're talking to Lucy Johnson from this quilting company." I'm like, I could care less who Lucy Johnson is, but within that little space, that sector, that audience, it's a big deal. So if you can become a big deal to that audience, you may not be Joe Rogan, who has a bigger audience, bigger potential audience overall, but you could become a big deal in your audience, and that's maybe what you should strive for. While at the same time, even if you don't, you're still going to get payoff, most likely because of all the relationships, potential clients, and referral partners that you'll develop.
So on your website, you've got exactly what you're talking about, the Quilting Arts podcast and Sew and Tell podcast, episode 10 of one and 51 of the other. I'm sure that when they started, the journey was very different than what it is like today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And finding relatively older women who want to listen to podcasts, even introducing them to the concept of podcasts was difficult, let alone convincing them to regularly listen. So podcasting is a journey, and it's still kind of like the wild, wild west, but it can pay off in many ways, and it can pay off in ways beyond just listenership. Let's put it that way.
I never thought that there would be podcasts about sewing and quilting, but like you said at the beginning of our conversation, any business can benefit from putting together a podcast. And seeing this, I mean, that's reaching way to a different, we're high tech and they are craft and sewing. So, that's interesting that there's such a wide spectrum of businesses that could benefit from that. podcasting, content creation, being out here in social media, posting, it's super helpful, but very time consuming. You know, when should a business consider reaching out to an expert like Rise 25 to get to that next level? When's it right? When does it make sense to engage with you and your team?
You know, I would say as soon as you decide you want to do a podcast, it makes sense to engage with Rise 25. You could start with like the basics, like I'm going to record interviews with people and then I'll submit them to Rise 25, and Rise 25 will produce the podcast. But you know, Rise 25 will go beyond that. They'll do the outreach for you if you'd like. If you feel like, you know, I love doing the podcast, but I hate requesting that guests come on, Rise 25 will request the guests. Rise 25.
That's one of the hardest parts, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
Is getting guests to come on a podcast, right?
It is. You know, people think that podcast producer, if you get the title podcast producer, it's just going to be you're editing sound and making it sound spiffy. Well, that can be part of it. You also have to do all the outreach to the guests. And so, you know, the hosts don't even want to bother with that. So that can be a hard part. Rise 25 will do that. In some ways, it can be good for you if you're really sure that you can find the right guests, and then that's a way to start the relationship right away before they even come on, if you could do the outreach yourself. That kind of gets you in the door and gets your name circulating in their head if they read your email, which hopefully they will. But that's a good way to do it. That's a good reason to reach out to Rise 25. And then Rise 25 will also do all the social media work for you. You know, it's whatever you want, Rise 25 will do for you. If you want to promote your podcast on social media, maybe have like a 1-minute video snippet of a captivating part of an interview that you did, Rise 25 will put that together, make it look flashy, and then put that out on your social media pages. So, you know, as far as marketing your podcast, getting people to be a part of your podcast, and then making your podcast sound good, Rise 25 can pretty much do all of it.
It basically sounds, Chad, like you guys do, like you're the easy button for folks that don't want to be involved with the production, don't want to be involved with getting the guests, don't want to be involved with the follow-up. And all of those things take time, right? If you want to develop your podcast into a more robust, and as well as the distribution of the content. And you guys kind of just are that easy button for all of those aspects regarding, you know, the back end that you don't see.
Yeah, absolutely. We have strategists who will meet with you to figure out, you know, who are the best guests, what kind of people should you zero in on, things like that. We also have people who will just kind of keep on you to encourage you to keep going. You know, sometimes you decide to do a podcast and it sounds good. Right? It sounds good at first, but then you just kind of get caught up in your own job and you forget about it. So we have people that will help you kind of to motivate you to keep going and see it pay off.
You know, we use Rise 25. I'm very happy with the services that you guys provide, but you know, that's the one area where I really like that you guys have kind of an accountability manager, if I would call it. And I want to give a shout out to Jasmine. So if you're watching, Jasmine, shout out to you. Thank you very much. You've been very helpful in kind of showing us the way, right, Dave? And how to go about, you know, doing this literally psychologist for you in some ways, because, you know, there's a lot going on in our lives and you're pulled this way and pulled that way. And then she has a way to, here's what you need to do and here's what you got to get done. And I think, to me, that's the biggest surprise of just, here's what we do. And, you know, we put your production together, which tons of companies can do, right? But an accountability manager, that's what I would call her, is to me like a game changer.
And if you start to wonder if you have the right content, if you're producing the right kind of content, our owners, you know, you'd think the owners are just out there in the middle of nowhere and totally inaccessible. Our guys are right there, and they have all sorts of entrepreneurial expertise and business expertise, and they are always more than happy to jump onto a call with you and say, hey, maybe we should start focusing our interview questions this way, or things like that, rather than just kind of leaving you out to figuring it out on your own.
No doubt. Shout out to Jeremy and John.
Absolutely.
I met Jeremy, wow, a couple of years back ago in Vegas at an event that they were hosting with a bunch of Amazon sellers, and that was the first time I got a taste of what you guys do, and we weren't in the market for podcasting at the time, uh, but the insight that Jeremy has, and as well as John, I mean, you guys have met and interviewed so many business leaders, so many different entrepreneurs. I just wanted to ask you to peel that back for me for a second. What were some of the more memorable moments that you could think of, you've worked with both of these guys. Are there some interviews or people or personalities that stood out to you like, wow, I didn't know that about that guy or gal? What do you have any of those?
A lot of the ones that I have interviewed, I haven't interviewed that many famous people. I've interviewed maybe like a former CEO of Potbelly Subs. He was the COO of Yum Brands International. So he was kind of a big deal.
Company.
Yeah, a big deal. Some of the people who have just incredible stories. They grew up in a country and they kind of fled their original country and they came over here and they started out with nothing and then they built themselves up into a person who makes 8 figures. Those are amazing, and hearing kind of like their daily rituals and their commitments to making themselves successful are very inspiring. People like that are the most memorable to me. And then the way that they can think about all elements of their business. Like I can think about sportscasting and think about doing good interviews and good play-by-play and writing stories, but I don't think about it like so as holistically as some of these amazing entrepreneurs do.
And do you find that people that listen to podcasts, and again, this is the consumption side of things, and you're talking about storytelling, is that something that people are just drawn to over and over again? What are some of the elements, if we were to rephrase that, what are some of those elements of a podcast that you find resonate the most with an audience? Is it that story from rags to riches? Is it, my routine in the morning and that made me $1 bazillion 10 years later? What do you find?
I think the storytelling is one. I think the opportunity to learn something is also one. I think in your guys' case, people would probably learn from the What the Tech podcast. I think humor is a good one. I think the personality of the host is a good one, and then interesting guests. All of those things can kind of blend together to make a good podcast.
There you go, Dave. You got to do this more stand-up here on the podcast.
I don't run a clean hour, so I'm gonna have to clean up my stand up for the B2B podcast world. I think that's kind of a challenge is in a B2B world versus the fun Joe Rogan world. You don't want to be too edgy, but you do want to be funny. I guess that's always been something that I've kind of played around with in my head. I don't want to be inappropriate. But, telling a good story, I guess you really have to know the whole story, have that story planned out in your head so that you don't get sidetracked and just say something inappropriate, because obviously in the B2B world, you can be entertaining without being dirty or rude. So
yeah, I think if you kind of can establish yourself as somebody who knows what you're talking about in your kind of specific niche, as I was talking about earlier. You don't have to be funny. You don't have to be like some morning DJ or something like that. You can just be a respected person in your field who has a podcast that people who are interested in what you want to talk about will come to listen to.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's all great advice. I wish we can have another hour or two to spend with you, Chad. I know your time is limited today, but I want to give you an opportunity to go ahead and speak freely on anything that's on your mind, anything you want to drop with us as something you think that is pressing and that you've seen. I would love for people to know about this.
Okay. I'm a Colorado guy, and coming into this football season, everybody in Colorado here was really excited about the acquisition of Russell Wilson as the Broncos quarterback, and it has been a complete and utter disaster so far.
Okay. So Russell Wilson, he was the man. Some people, I've been to a couple trade shows. They say that I kind of look like him. Tell me I don't look like him, please.
Hey, Russell Wilson is a very good looking guy. If somebody compared me to somebody like that, I wouldn't be insulted. Now, as far as
my wife doesn't, she doesn't like that. She says you're better looking than him. But I've been to, I had a guy. This was right before COVID. He said, I was at a trade show down in Cleveland or somewhere, and he's like, I just got off the flight and I saw Russell Wilson in first class. And you remind me of him. And I was like, get out of here. And then later on in that conference, somebody else said the same thing. They were like, I was on that flight and I saw him, and you remind me of him.
And I've been saying it for years, Rolando, and everybody I know agrees that you do look like Russell Wilson. And like Chad's saying, I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of.
No, you could do much worse than that.
So Russell Wilson, he's been a bust. That's what you're telling me?
He has. We hired a new coach. We got a new quarterback. We've been kind of wandering aimlessly through the wilderness. We thought we'd finally reach the land of milk and honey, and it's worse now than it's ever been. We had Peyton Manning.
Why Seattle got rid of him? You know,
there's no doubt, and I'm sure their fans are laughing so hard, and the people in Seattle are laughing so hard. You know, at least last year with the Broncos, I could hope for, if they lost, I could hope for a good draft positioning. We've given all our draft picks to Seattle now. So now we're losing, and we have no draft picks. Our future looks as bleak as it's ever looked.
So Seattle's just licking their lips. It's like, awesome.
They
gave nothing away and gained a lot of draft picks.
Exactly.
Good draft picks.
Their quarterback, Geno Smith, who was considered a journeyman and Russell Wilson's backup, he's probably not going to be their long-term future, but he's playing better than Russell Wilson right now.
Not crazy.
So who came out on top on this one for sure?
Total disaster. Everybody except the Broncos came out on top.
Wow. Where are they right now? What's their record?
They're 2-3. But they're boring.
The season's not over yet.
I'm sorry. They're 2-4. They're 2-4. It's over.
Oh yeah, no, it's over. Yeah, no.
They're the lowest scoring team in the league.
No offense. They ought to bring back the other guy from Florida from years ago that was a bust too. The
Tebow.
His name. Tebow. Yes. Tim Tebow. Bring him back. Look, his style, you know what's crazy? His style of play would fit in today's, I would call it, it's kind of a run and shoot offense. Really.
Yeah.
No, it's the run and pass offense. Both, right? He's a runner, but he can kind of throw. He's not the best thrower. Kind of. But in that style of offense today, he probably fits better than when he came in, which was drop back passing, and that's what was. Now it's the option to run with the throw. That's what everybody's run.
Yeah, you're probably right. He probably was a little bit ahead of his time.
Yeah, or in the wrong position.
Yeah, I think he tried to change positions. He tried to come back and play for the Jaguars as a tight end last year, but it didn't work so well. I guess starting a new position in the NFL at age 35 is probably not the best idea.
Both. If he were 25, he could probably pull it off.
He probably could.
35, boy, those knees, the back, the shoulders hurt way, way more than when you were 25 and in the league. And you're like, I can bounce back tomorrow from a hard practice.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was his story. We were talking about this earlier. Mm-hmm. It was his storytelling and his story that made him so popular, not his exceptional play on the field. He just had a story that people gravitated to, and they loved it. They loved it, and people still talk about it. And he's not a memorable player on the field.
No, but look at the guy the Saints have. His name escapes me. He's not the starter, but the backup for the Saints. He's a Tim Tebow.
Taysom Hill.
Yes, he comes in when they're gonna run, right? And he does the option play, and sometimes, every now and then, he may pop a throw, but more than likely, it's a dive play or quarterback sneak, or he takes off running with a sweep.
Yeah, Tebow probably could have become a guy like that. I think he was pretty interested in becoming like the man at the time, which may have been too much for him to be thinking about at the time. But he could have become a guy like that for sure.
Absolutely. So we could talk sports. I know you're a sports guy. just a plug for any of the sports teams that you follow, Chad.
Nuggets. The Nuggets season starts tonight, and people probably nationally hear Nuggets and they yawn or their eyes glaze over, but they're a threat this year, and don't count them out. They have a good chance of at least appearing in the finals, if not taking the whole thing.
Ooh, those are fighting words.
You heard it here first. Yeah, those are fighting words.
Fighting words. Chad, if somebody wants to, catch you, wants your expertise, or they say, hey, I want my podcast, I need help. I need help with my podcast. Where should they go?
Yeah, just go to Rise25, rise25.com. You can just send our support team a message, and they will put you in touch with me or anybody else who might be appropriate to talk to you.
All right. And if people want to personally get in touch with you, could they go to LinkedIn and check you out? Are you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me. Just type in Chad Franzen. And, I'm sure you'll find me. Just type in Chad Franzen, Rise25. You should be able to find me, no problem.
All right. Wonderful. Well, Chad, thank you very much for coming on the show today. Today we've been speaking to Chad Franzen of Rise25, sportscaster, broadcaster, play-by-play guy, world traveler. Did I miss anything else about you, Chad, that we should tell people?
I think you got it covered.
All right. Wonderful. Chad, thanks for coming on today. Yeah. We really appreciate you.
Hey, thanks so much. It was great to be here.
Thanks, Chad.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to What the Tech. Be sure to check out our other episodes featuring awesome tech and amazing guests. Find them on circuitloops.com or wherever you consume your favorite podcasts.